now it's time for the live counterattacks, up to 5 minutes each, starting again with Professor Bercuson.
Thank you very much. Remember, please, that we're not debating the French fact. We're not debating Quebec's uniqueness. We're not debating the importance of the contribution of Francophones to the history of Canada. I absolutely agree with Dr. Maioni that Canada began as a French fact. It's undeniable. I absolutely agree that the Quebec Act of 1774 guaranteed to Roman Catholic Francophones certain rights that accrue to them to this day. I think that's absolutely true. But what I insist upon is that when we're using language, words such as culture and nation, we have to be precise about what it means. Now, one of Professor Maioni's main points was that Canada was created to preserve the French fact, and I think I've got that right. But in fact, Confederation came about for a number of reasons, including a political deadlock in the province of Canada, the desire of the maritime colonies to unite together primarily for reasons of their very high debt levels, the ending of reciprocity with the United States in 1865. Americans ended a 10-year treaty, and Canadians were anxious to find markets for their products and to create a free market area in the northern half of the continent. For defense against the United States, which during the Civil War especially was unfriendly for very good reasons to Great Britain. Can't get into the details of it, but certainly the Fenian raids in 1866 were an impetus for Confederation. And finally, and I think this is really important, to divorce Canada West from Canada East. Canada West and Canada East wanted to get out of each other's legislative hair. And so what Confederation did was it said to Canada West, you're now Ontario, and to Canada East, you're now Quebec, and you don't have to deal with each other's business at a cultural, linguistic, and religious level. So that's what Confederation was all about. The preservation of the French fact has occurred largely because of the French themselves and what they have made of their history since that time. Because again, I refer you to the words of the British North America Act of 1867, which only specified that French and English be equal languages in Parliament itself, in the House of Commons and in the Senate. That sort of protection in and of itself would never have allowed Quebec to flourish to the point where it is today. So when we talk about nations, we talk about two nations, for example, I say, well, I'm not sure if Quebec is a nation. I know my parliament and your parliament in its wisdom said that it was, but where's the other nation in the two-nation hierarchy? Is the rest of Canada another nation? Canada is certainly a nation, a federation. We know that well. But Canada without Quebec, first of all, there is no such thing at the moment. And to call it a nation is, in my opinion, to use the word nation in an arbitrary way. 1 minute. And I would use the same argument, exactly the same argument, with regard to culture. Yes, there is a Canadian culture, absolutely. And anybody who spends any time in the United States can understand and knows that there are some significant differences between their systems and our systems, and their cultures and our cultures. But there are distinct cultures across this country as well. And I think that in the same way that we have to be very precise about the way we use nation, we have to be precise in the way we use culture. And to say biculture means, yeah, not only that French Quebec is one culture, where is the other culture? Thank you.
You know, I'm a political scientist, but I'm always amazed why we begin these debates about what Canada is, particularly when we're talking about language and culture, as if it's a zero-sum game, as if recognizing that Canada can be and is bilingual or bicultural or binational somehow makes it less of a country, or that by admitting that we have an important kind of a national character alongside one that's rooted in English Canadian culture and history, that we somehow make lesser. I'm trying to figure that one out. As far as Professor Bercuson's presentation, all of it is historically true, and all of it is, in effect, factually accurate. But from what I could understand, the only problem in trying to admit that Canada could be considered bilingual would be that we'd have to pay for CBC French language in the lower mainland of British Columbia. That's the only cost I saw associated with this particular problem. If that's the only problem, I'm sure we can work around that. I'm sure even in these very fiscally conscious times, we can work around the CBC in the lower mainland. Is Quebec a nation? I think that this is a question that is so moot for Francophone Quebecers that it's not even, I'm not sure why it has to be debated. Outside of Quebec, we tend to have a problem with understanding the difference between nation or nationalist and sovereigntist. These are two different things. These are two different lines, these are two different check boxes that people check off when they claim an identity, all right? And to be a nationalist in Quebec is to believe that Quebec and Francophones and cultural and linguistic attachments are different than Canadians who speak English. I'm not sure that that's really a problem, and it is a fact. I live in a household in which I was brought up in English Canada, or English-speaking Quebec, as Professor Bercuson. My cultural cues are the same that many of you have here. Margaret Atwood, our wonderful, I didn't say Don Cherry, but the kinds of cultural cues that we all don't have to scratch our heads to think about. But my children, who are really now growing up in a Francophone culture, going to French school, maybe it's because they're teenagers and they're aliens, actually. That's probably more of the reason. But they have cultural cues that are completely different, right? They know of a French-speaking cultural scene that is completely different from anything that I grew up with or that I even know about now. And the fact is that when I ask them, what does it mean to be a Quebecer, they have no hesitation. They can explain it to me. They're different, they're this, their language, their culture. It's completely natural to them to think of themselves as belonging to a distinct society and a different nation.